Today we are talking about this, the Autel Evo Nano Plus. This is the latest drone from Autel, and in my opinion, this is the first time that we've really seen Autel take the fight to DJI and actually jump ahead of them in a way that we've not seen before. In today's video, I'm going to give you a walkthrough of its features and capabilities. I'm going to give you some thoughts on the drone itself, its camera, its wireless link, and then at the end, I'm going to give you my final thoughts on this new drone. Now, this was supplied to me by a fantastic supporter of this channel. It was not sent to me by Autel. Dave at South Wales Drones actually ordered this for himself, but sent it to me before he even broke the seal on the box. So I just want to say a massive, massive thank you to Dave. He is a dealer, and if you're interested in getting one of these from Autel or DJI, because he is an independent dealer, I will put a link to his website in the description of this video. Please do check it out. And again, I just want to say a massive thank you from me, Dave, because I would not have been able to make this review without your support. Anyway, let's get on with it and let's take a closer look at this new drone. The new Autel Evo Nano Plus is one of the smallest yet capable drones on the market. It's a folding drone that weighs just 249 grams and has an all-new 50 megapixel camera. It has a 1/1.28 inch sensor with an f1.9 lens that allows for both phase detect and contrast detect autofocus. It's capable of 50 megapixel stills as well as recording video in 4K 30 frames a second as well as HDR. The Nano Plus features both front and rear object avoidance sensors as well as vision positioning sensors below, consisting of cameras and audible sensors that allow it to sense the terrain it's flying over. It can fly for up to 28 minutes based on its new battery and has an all-new digital FPV system that allows for up to 10 kilometers range and resolutions up to 2.7K. With this model, you also have an all-new remote controller, which is a game-style remote controller that allows you to connect up your smart device to the drone for both control and the FPV live feed. Okay, so what we're going to do now is give you some thoughts on the drone itself, batteries and charging. I'll move on to the remote and then talk about that, the live feed system, because I've seen some interesting things I want to discuss on that too. Then we'll talk about some footage from the camera and how that behaves. And at the end, I'll give you my thoughts. Now, the drone itself is extremely lightweight. It's below 250 grams or 249. It is astonishing just how much technology is packed into this. When you first pick it up, it is extremely lightweight. You have this nice little gimbal protector, which I'm more than happy with. A bit easier than some of the other ones I've seen out there. It simply unclips. You simply lift it up and it frees up nice and easily, no problems at all. And then we've got this little clamp around that holds the props and things in place when it's traveling. You simply undo it and it's much better than that thing that we've seen on the larger drone from DJI. The arms fold out. There's no rotating arms in this like we've seen on the older Mavics. They simply fold out one at a time, and then the drone simply goes on the deck ready to go. Obviously, we have folding props. They are held on with screws, so if you do want to change them, you do need a screwdriver, but that is included in the kit as well. Battery-wise, these are incredibly small. It's surprising the amount of flight time you're able to get from this. I haven't pushed the flight time to the absolute max, but I was easily getting towards 20 minutes, and that is more than enough for me. Now, something you will notice when you first pick up this drone is the feel of the plastics, and that can easily be confused for cheap when it's thin for lightweight. There is no question, you feel the battery, you can squeeze the plastics, they move in, and even the drone itself, you pick up the drone and the plastics do squeeze in when you do press them. But that is the current trend that we are facing on all of the modern drones, because they are all trying to get the weight down as much as possible and pack in as many technical features as they possibly can. You saw it with the Mavic 3 and we're feeling it again here. And in fact, The plastics are so thin, you can even see through them, even in this orange, to the boards that are located below. You can see some things below the top. I don't think I'll be able to show that on camera. Let me just go over. I don't know if I can. However, with my own eyesight, I can see that there's something here. I can see the color change here. I can see the color change here as well. I'm not saying it's a bad thing, but it is something to be aware of, because it's easy to start to think, oh, that's made cheaply. It's not that it's cheap. It's all about weight saving. When we flip the drone over, things are the same underneath. You can actually see the motor screws on these, something we're not used to seeing on drones. So again, there's no covers over the arm mounts here. Again, you can see the screw area around the bottom of the motors. If we look in under the gimbal, we can easily see in there as well. There seems to be, I'm not sure if that's the compass down there, and you can see the mounts for the camera easily as well. So everything on these is about weight saving. It's about being able to cut every single gram out they can to get the drone below 250. Just something I really do like on this drone I want to mention as well is the location of the SD card slot. You have your USB-C port on the back with the SD card slot down here. It's not under a flap, but it is so easy to get in and out. I am fed up of drones having SD card slots below little covers that you need really long fingernails to get out. It is easily accessible, no problem to get to it here at all. It's simply press in, pops out. I've got no concerns with that coming out in flight. Once it's locked in, it's been absolutely fine. Battery wise, it simply clips into the back. You have these two little clips on either side and it slides in, and then you can see inside the drone, and it's astonishing. There really is so little in here, and I'm not saying it's that cut back, it's just that everything is packed into this top area and this bottom area, and that's where all of the technology is for the object sensors that we have on the front and back, as well as the vision positioning system. We've got our object cameras on the bottom here. We have our ultrasonic system, and that air then is being cooled because this area here does have heat sinks. I'm not sure, is that metal or plastic? I'm not easily able to tell. I still think that's plastic, but there does appear to be vanes put in to help with the cooling. There's no holes on that area there, but you definitely got the grill there with that fan blowing air out from there. And then that's obviously got grills on the side here and here, and that's obviously doing the cooling for the inside of the drone as well. The batteries do have this proprietary connector, nothing particularly unusual in that. Very similar to what we've seen in the past, just multiple pins. So again, if I just hop on the overhead, you can see them down there. They do have that charge hub included as well, so you can use that for the ability to charge the batteries. But it is nice that you can also charge the batteries in the drone as well. And what I've started to do is actually put two batteries on the charge hub and then use a different charger for charging the battery in the drone, because it just allows me to get things up and running a little bit quicker. But something I have noticed is that it does take longer to charge in the drone than it does on the charge hub. Next, moving over to the remote controller, and whilst there is a lot to like here, this is probably where I have my most complaints about this product. Talking about the good first of all, well, the remote is really nice in the hand. It is surprisingly weighty actually. It's heavy, but I don't find it overly heavy, but it does give a nice reassuring feel. The sticks are nicely placed and the buttons that are on here are nicely in reach, and I don't really have any complaints about that at all. Moving around it, obviously we got a device holder here, which is a telescopic one, which goes down to there. You pull it out and it has that spring section, and I can get my iPhone 13 Pro Max in there, no problems at all. Little bit tight in the case, but it does go in. We have our charge port on the bottom down here. We have our USB output up here. We have some function buttons on the front. So we have our home, power and pause button with the LEDs to check the status. We have our camera button, single function button, and our gimbal wheel. The sticks feel nice, although they do have a limited throw, and I'll talk about that a bit more in a minute, and I do think that they should have had a bit more. However, the indents are quite nice in the center, and the overall feel of the stick is fairly good. Whilst that's the good, there are also some really glaring omissions on this remote, and I am shocked that they haven't done these things. For instance, whilst the device holder is nice and holds the phone, it is completely flat and doesn't tilt up. In my use, I did find it difficult at times to see the screen on my phone because my natural position for holding the remote is flat like that or like that, and that means my eye line to the display is quite on an angle, and for me, I would have preferred the ability to tilt the screen up. However, if I do it with the remote, I'm then using my fingers in an unnatural position and I'm not able to get the dexterity that I would usually have. Also, you do have to remove the sticks to store the remote in the bag. However, there is nowhere to put them. Whilst they are really nicely made and they actually have a lot thicker shafts than you see on the DJI ones, there really is just nowhere to store them once you've taken them off the remote, and you end up having to throw them in the bottom of the pack. Now, I do know Ken Dobo has made a piece that you can stick on here that actually has the storage in for these, but it just seems bonkers to me that Autel didn't add in storage as standard on the remote, because there is tons of space here. Literally, it could have been anywhere, yet they've chose not to do it. Other thing I just want to mention is checking the battery on this remote. There is LEDs for doing that, but I can't find a way of bringing up the battery level without actually turning the remote controller on. So for instance, if I press to power it on, you do get the battery level indicated, but there doesn't seem to be a quick way to check the battery level when you've got it in the bag. So before you're going out, a press of the button doesn't seem to bring on the light. A double press doesn't do it. So unless I'm missing something, I think Autel should add in the ability to just press the button and bring up the indication so we can see what the battery level is. The other thing I just want to also quickly mention, as I did say earlier, is about the stick movement and how restricted that is, or limited that is. Whilst they are really nice feeling, I'm a bit surprised just how limited the movement of the sticks is. If I just put the sticks back on, and as I've said, they've got these nice, really thick shafts, a lot thicker than you find on the DJI ones, which gives them a bit more of a reassuring feel. The movement on the gimbals is very, very limited, and I don't really understand why. It's a good size remote. There's no limitations on the sizing around it, so I'm just not sure why there's quite so much limit on the movement. And I did find it a little difficult to do very, very gentle moves simply because of the small throw that there are on the sticks. Overall, there is nothing majorly wrong here because, as I said, the remote feels very, very good. But I do think Autel have missed a few tricks with the fact of limited buttons, the short throw, and the fact that there's nowhere to store the sticks, and the fact that you can't tilt this up. Now, the kit I was sent over on this one is the sort of Fly More kit, which includes all of the extras. So you get an extra 2 batteries, which gives you 3 in total. You get the charge hub for charging them, very similar to what we've seen from DJI. And you get the bag and a couple of other extra accessories as well. Personally, if I was going to order this drone, I would order it with this kit because it has pretty much everything you need other than an SD card. And that way you don't have to worry about adding extra batteries later. I think 3 would probably be enough for most people. So if you are looking to get one of these, this kit is probably the one to look at, but obviously that does come at additional cost. Just to quickly mention about charging and the charge hub that they include with this kit, you can charge the batteries in the drone via the USB-C cable in the back, but this kit does include the sequential charger as well. Basically the same as we've seen from other manufacturers. It charges the batteries one at a time, has a USB-C port on here, so you simply plug the supplied adapter in, put each battery on, and it'll charge them up sequentially as the time goes on. It doesn't allow for parallel charging, but there are third-party chargers available if you want to do that. But one nice thing is you can put 2 batteries on here and charge via the hub, and if you then have another USB-C charger, you can simply plug that into the back of the drone and allow that to charge the 3rd battery just to get yourself up and running a little bit quicker. The next thing we're going to do is walk through the Autel Sky app and just show you some of its features and the sort of settings that are available. Now, I'm currently recording this through the Nano Plus via a screen record on my phone, and you can see the overlay of the OSD here as well. And what we'll do is walk through this so you guys can see it. Now, looking around the screen, if I look down, you can see along the top, you've got the status indications as well as our mode options. On the left, we have our map and radar screen. And then on the right-hand side, you have the options for the camera as well as the main settings menu. On the screen, swiping down or up will actually bring in or take away those modes. So I can swipe it down, it brings it all in, and swipe it up, it gives you a complete clear view of the display, so you don't have any of that overlay available. Looking at the bottom left hand side, you can see we have a little map icon, and if you tap that, it simply swaps the radar for the map, but also tapping the map will then bring it up full screen so you guys can see that as well, and moves the camera into a little view at the bottom. But you can then swap that around as well, nice and easily, depending on what you want. Then above this, you have the camera angle icon, and this shows you what the current angle of the camera is. So for instance, if I adjust it, you'll see the camera move down, and you'll then see that move as well to reflect that as I'm moving the camera around.
Please take off later.
As you can hear, the app also has audible warnings as well, which we'll talk about a bit more in a minute, and it will speak out the warnings that you can see that have now appeared on the screen. The voice is a bit like a sort of 2010 Siri. I think it could do with updating a little bit, but it does make me laugh because it calls the gimbal Gimbal, and it's sort of become my little affectionate name for this aircraft. Moving up to the top left, you have the little Autel icon, which takes you to the main home screen for the app.
Card will switch to flash card.
When you come back in, it again reads you out the warnings. Next to that, you can see it says smooth, and this is where we select the modes that are available. So if I tap it, it goes to standard, ludicrous, and back to smooth. And this is the actual flight modes of the aircraft, because there's no mode switch on the remote control itself. So you need to select these by tapping on the screen. Scrolling all the way along the top, you have all of the usual information such as remote signal, GPS level, remote controller battery level, aircraft battery level, flight time available. And you can see this little red icon here with the little lines around it is the object sensing icon. And the nice thing with this is you can tap it to turn the object sensors on or off. So now it's gone green, they're turned on, or if you tap it again, it gives you the option to simply disable them. Next to that, you have the little cog, which takes us into the main settings menu, which we will go through in a moment. You have a little help icon, and then we have our camera controls down here with some additional controls under these two little lines here with the little dots, which is to indicate the settings that are available. If we scroll through the options on the app that are available, if we go to the bottom, we have the Pro options, which gives us full control over the camera. You've got program, manual, or shutter speed mode. So if I go to manual, I can literally fully control the camera with ISO, shutter speed, and white balance. Obviously, there's no aperture adjustment on this because it's a fixed aperture camera, but it does give us the full controls that are available, or we can simply put it back to program. Next above this, you have the Pano options. Now this gives us the option of spherical, wide angle, landscape, and portrait. Again, I'm not going to go into too much depth on these, but they are there for you. We've got the hyperlapse modes, whether you want to do an orbit or do a manual straight flight hyperlapse. We've got our video mode, which is for our standard video recording. Photo mode for standard photography, a portrait mode, and then you have our quick shots, which gives our additional extra features such as flick, fadeaway, rocket, and orbit, and that's those special automated moves that the aircraft can do as well. If we jump back to video first of all, here is the big important one, because this is where we have the ability to change the settings of the recording resolution. If we click on the little sliders up here, that will bring up the main settings. Now we're in video, and here we can select resolution and frame rates for the camera as well. So for instance, if I tap on it, you can see we can go up to 4K, which gives us a maximum of 30 frames a second down to 24. We can go to 1080p up to 60 frames a second down to 24. However, there is some limitations on that 60 frames, or we can go to 2.7K up to 30 frames a second as well. Moving over to photo, and again, tapping that same little screen here, you have the option of setting the picture mode and the resolution. Now, there is this full high 50 megapixel mode on this camera, but that does have limitations that it only works in JPEG and it doesn't support a lot of the extra features, whereas you can drop it down to that 4:3, basically 4096 by 3072 resolution that allows you to do other things such as single burst timer and AEB, but you can only do that in that mode or below. That full 50 megapixel mode is limited to single shot photography only. Next, if we click the little cog at the top, this will give us the main settings menu for the drone, and in here we can adjust all of the controls. Under safety, you have things such as max altitude, distance limit, return to home altitude, the ability to set the home point, compass calibration, IMU calibration, battery information, locate my drone, and advanced settings. If we go into the battery, you can set things such as battery temperature, our low battery warning level, our battery protection level, which self-discharges, our discharge times, battery health. So all of that usual battery info that you've had like on other drones. Then, if we go under the bottom and then go under advanced settings, here you've got the obstacle avoidance sensor options. So you can turn on visual obstacle avoidance on or off if you want that. The ability to show the radar map. You've then got takeoff in attitude mode option there as well, which allows you to take off in that mode if GPS isn't available. Next, moving down to control, here you can set the options for the app. So for instance, we can set the units, whether we want it in metric meters a second, or imperial. We've got our stick mode, our flight mode options, and this allows us to do some setting adjustments under each flight mode for smooth, which is that slower mode, standard, and then ludicrous. And under ludicrous, you now have this new option that allows you to choose video or speed, which gets you back up to that full speed setting that they took away in that firmware, which has now been returned. So there is a compromise between full speed of the aircraft and video quality when you're in that ludicrous mode, and that setting is there for you as well. Scrolling further down, we then have the options for what we want the buttons to do. So again, you can configure that function button on the corner, and you can actually configure it under 1 tap or 2 tap, depending on what you want it to do. We have our RC calibration options, our gimbal mode, which allows you to change it to behave something like FPV rather than standard. You've got the option to extend the gimbal pitch adjustment, like I've done now, to allow me to pitch the gimbal up, manual gimbal adjustment, gimbal calibration, and gimbal angle options. Next, moving down to the camera screen, and here we have the SD card options, which allows us to format. You've got the option to enable recording for audio during video shooting and enable buffering during video shooting as well. Grid options, photo format, hyperlapse, pano, and all of the other settings such as H.264, H.265, MPEG-4 or movie settings. Download sizes for downloading the thing to the app. Defog setting, which allows you to dehaze the image on board the camera if you want to do it. Overexposed warning. Add timestamps on photo and videos. Custom stamp for putting sort of your logo on, or camera reset. Next, moving down to the image transmission settings. Here you have the option for setting the image transmission mode, whether you want it in smooth, HD or 2.7K. Now, if you look on the screen, it actually tells you what options are available where. So for instance, at the moment, you only have smooth for some of the modes. And then for instance, 1080p 6030 gives you support for smooth and HD, whereas 4K 30 only supports the smooth mode like I've got here. Then finally, under the about option has all of the things like the aircraft serial number and things like that. Now, I've not gone into every single feature on this, but I just thought I'd give you a quick overview of the basics, and it has pretty much everything in place you need to be able to get the best from the drone. One thing I just want to touch on quickly is the digital live feed from this drone. Now, the image quality and range is very, very good. Autel's new digital FPV live feed works extremely well. It allows up to that 2.7K at low range and then drops to 1080p. The image is very, very clear and the range is well beyond what I would use anyway. However, I did notice in use that the latency seemed a little higher than I was expecting. In flight, as I've mentioned a few times, it does feel a little bit detached at times and a little bit delayed. So I decided to set it up at home on the bench outside. I set it up with my Mavic 2 Pro and the Nano Plus looking at a phone on a timer, and then I recorded that on the bench looking at the receive side just to check what the two systems behaved like. Whilst this isn't a perfectly scientific method, it gives me an idea of the difference in behavior. Having spent a bit of time looking at both of these, to me, it is clear that the Autel has a variable latency compared to the DJI's being a bit more stable, but B, it's definitely more. It depends on what it's doing, and it seems to be anywhere between 10 and 100 milliseconds, and it is something that I was able to notice as someone who tends to use very low latency FPV systems such as HD0 or the DJI digital FPV system. It's absolutely something you would get used to, and it's not really anything that's going to cause a problem on a camera drone, but it was something I was able to notice, and it was something I thought I would mention to you. Overall, it is impressive how far Autel have come with their digital live feed. The image quality is basically as good as OcuSync. It's just that it seems to be a little bit behind with regards to latency. The next thing we're going to do is talk about flight behaviour, how it feels, battery, as well as return to home. Now, the flight characteristics of this aircraft are what I would describe as a bit mushy, a little bit slow, but actually very good for a camera drone. It's not a particularly fast drone, and it isn't particularly fast at reacting to stick inputs, apart from in ludicrous mode. In smooth and the normal mode, everything is very much held back, but it does feel a little bit delayed at times compared to what you would usually expect on some of the others. The drone doesn't feel as robotic as some of the DJI models, but also I think even in ludicrous mode at times it does still feel a bit reserved. You can get it up to that 15 meters a second in ludicrous mode if you prioritize speed over the camera, but it isn't particularly quick to get up to that, and it again still feels quite restricted in how fast the aircraft is being allowed to move forward. With regards to flight though, it is fairly good, and in that smooth mode you're able to get it really nicely dialed in to allow you to make some really nice camera moves. To be honest, standard mode will be perfect for everyday photography. You've then got your ludicrous mode, which is everything's a bit more hyped up. The yaw especially is very sensitive in ludicrous mode. However, you're probably going to find yourself spending most of the time in standard mode, but you do have that smooth mode there if you want to dial things back a little bit as well. Now, flight time on this, I haven't done any tests because these are brand new batteries. They're not mine. I didn't want to push them to the limits. Autel are saying, I think, between 26 and 28 minutes. I'm not saying I've got that out and out, but the flight time I've had is certainly not a concern for me. I'm certainly getting towards 20 minutes, which is long enough to do anything I want to do. I'm not going to really go in any further on that. There are people who will have dialed it down to the second. What I would say is their flight time estimations are similar to what other manufacturers are doing. They're not exactly dead on, but you're not going to be far away, and it's going to be heavily dependent on conditions as well, but I certainly wasn't disappointed. Another few tests that I had done on this drone was with the return to home feature and just checking its accuracy. And I have to say, in all of my tests, it is very, very good. There was only one occasion it landed about 1.5 meters to the side, and that was in very, very low light. In daylight conditions, it has come down easily within a foot, but really within sort of 6 inches of the original takeoff spot most of the time, if not on the nail. And you can see as the aircraft is coming down, the app actually tells you that it's correct in the position, allowing it to get exactly where it needs to be. But if there is anything there it doesn't like, that obstacle sensing system on the bottom will pick it up and it will say that the landing area is unsafe. But the accuracy of that vision positioning system in combination with that GPS seems to be very good, and I've got no complaints there at all. Overall, it flies very well, not particularly as sort of tight as some of the other drones out there, but certainly nothing to complain about. Okay, so it's time for the big one, and it's time to talk about the camera. Now, as this is the Nano Plus, it has that 1/1.28 of an inch sensor that has an effective megapixel count of 50. It has that 85-degree field of view, and it has some really interesting features and capabilities, and overall, it does a very, very good job. However, it does have some pretty big limitations as well, which we'll talk about in a minute. Talking about video first of all, the image quality from this sensor in 4K 30 looks very, very good. It is one of the best I have seen in the smaller drones period, and I really do think most people will be really impressed with just how good the 4K 30 image quality looks in standard use. You can record that in both H.264 and H.265 as well, which is nice, and you've got up to 100 megabits a second when doing that. You then also have other modes available, which is 2.7K up to 30 and 1080p up to 60. However, there is a limitation in 1080p, and that is up to 30 frames a second. You get the full field of view of the sensor, but unfortunately in above 30 frames a second, so up to 60 frames, there is a crop applied. I will be honest, the image quality in 1080p is quite disappointing in 60 frames a second. It's okay when you move down to the 30 frames, but the second you go above 30 frames a second up to that cropped image, it falls over very, very quickly. And personally, it's a bit of a disappointment because that's one of my favorite modes. And from what I've seen, it's not really up to the standard I would expect. Moving over to stills, and as I've said, it does have that 50 megapixel, effective megapixel, I should say, count. However, you do need to take into account that there is a bit of playing going on here, and really you should deem these as a 12 megapixel sensor with a 50 megapixel mode, but it isn't the same as you would find on a proper 50 megapixel camera. In that 50 megapixel mode, the images look very, very good, but they do lack detail considering they are meant to be 50 megapixel. There are also some limitations in 50 megapixel mode, and that is that you can only take images in JPEG and there is no RAW option available for that. If you drop down to the lower option, which is basically 12 megapixel, you do have the option for both JPEG and RAW, and those images are again very good, but that megapixel count is more as we would have expected from a 12 megapixel sensor, and it doesn't have any of that extra processing and little clever work going on like you have in the 50. The 50 mode isn't a true 50 megapixel. Whilst it is an effective 50 megapixel count, there is some cleverness going on with the layers on the sensor, and whilst it does bring extra detail to the table, it isn't dramatically more than you would get from a 12 megapixel sensor. One of the nice benefits of this sensor trickery that is going on is the ability to zoom, and that allows you to zoom up to 4 times. Now, there is some interesting behavior on this, especially in video mode. As I mentioned earlier, in 4K 30, it doesn't have a crop. In 1080p 30, it doesn't have a crop, but it does in 1080p 60. In normal modes, you can zoom in up to 4 times, but you can also zoom in up to 4 times in that 1080p 60 mode, giving you some extra reach than you would have ordinarily. Obviously, though, when you do this, you do lose detail, and it is nowhere near as good as the standard zoom. However, it is nice that you have the ability to get in a bit closer if you wanted to via that crop that you're getting in the 1080p 60 mode. You also have that zoom function in stills as well, but again, you are cropping in on the sensor for zoom. It is basically a digital zoom because it is not optical, but it is handy to be able to look at things when you're out and about if you wanted to see what's going on, or if there's an object that you want to check is where you would expect it to be, as long as you're not looking for too much detail. One last thing just to mention is the low light performance on this sensor. Because it is a small sensor, you would expect it to struggle. However, with that extra effective megapixel count that we have, it actually does a really, really good job in low light. It keeps the noise to an absolute minimum, and you're able to get some very, very good images and video out of this drone, even as it's heading close towards darkness. I took it out the other night for a spin, and I was very surprised just how well it did. And things have come on dramatically from the likes of the Mavic Pro that we had a few years ago, whereas it was almost unusable in these light conditions, whereas now the data you're getting out of it is actually very usable and very good overall. One last thing I just want to talk about before I jump over and give you my final thoughts, and that is geofencing. And the reality is there is no no fly zones or geofencing installed on these drones as I understand it. Autel take the approach of you are the pilot and you make the decision. I find this rather refreshing, and whilst I do support geofencing when implemented properly following national guidelines in each country, I don't agree with the blanket approach that some of the manufacturers have taken and heavily restrict what you can do with your aircraft when you want to be able to fly it near areas that they say you shouldn't be doing it. This drone at no time has restricted or prevented me from flying, and Autel put the onus on you, the pilot, to make the decision on what is and isn't safe. I think this is extremely refreshing, and it is a big plus for Autel, especially if you are a commercial operator or someone who lives near something where you have permission to fly, but other manufacturers have put restrictions in place, whereas Autel will let you make the choice. However, as always with these things, that means then the responsibility falls on you. There are some limitations with regards to absolute altitude and things like that, which I'm not going to go into, and I do fully support them being in place, but it is good to see that there is no nannying NFC system in place that is just making your life difficult, but not only difficult when it should be. Often people have problems with these systems when they shouldn't be kicking in simply because of bugs and issues with poorly designed software, and that isn't something you're going to have to worry about with this. So, to give you my final thoughts on the Autel Evo Nano Plus and if I think you should consider buying this drone or not. Now, starting with the positives, there is so much here to like. The drone weighs less than 250 grams. In that package, you're getting great flight time, high quality 4K 30 video, front and rear object avoidance sensors, and no fly zones because the drone doesn't use NFCs. Autel really have done a very good job of packing in a lot of technology into such a small platform. The camera on this drone is very good, and the 4K 30 is one of my favorite modes on this drone. That stills mode is also interesting with the ability to go up to 50 megapixel. However, there are some limitations on that. The fact that it only allows you to do that in JPEG, and the reality is it's not really 50 megapixel like you would find 50 megapixel on a high-end mirrorless camera. It's a special sensor mode, and really you should class it as a high quality 12 megapixel rather than 50, but it does do a very good job, though it does lack detail when you do start to zoom into the image. The flight characteristics on the drone, as I mentioned earlier, are okay, a bit mushy here and there, but overall it's nothing I'm particularly concerned about. And I do like the remote controller as well, and whilst there are a few annoyances with it, it's one of my favorite remotes I've used in a while. It feels really good in the hand, it has a nice weight to it, and once you put a bracket on that allows you to tilt your phone up and stick the stick somewhere, I think you'll be more than happy. Overall, there is a lot to like here, and it is impressive to see how far Autel have come and how they've caught up to the other manufacturers as well with things like their wireless video system, because as I showed earlier, they really have come a long way. And whilst it does have a bit more latency than what we've seen on OcuSync, it is very good, it's very clear, and at no point have I run out of range on this thing. It has simply done what I would have expected the other system to do without any problems at all. Whilst there is a lot to like, there are a few issues as well, and one or two of them are probably deal breakers for me. The biggest of them is the 1080p 60 mode. Whilst in 1080p 30 and 4K 30 there's no crop, 1080p 60 does have a crop, and the image quality is below the standard that I would be happy with. I do use 1080p 60 quite a lot in my drone footage, and it was a bit of a disappointment to see that on this, and it's a shame Autel couldn't have got that 1080p 60 mode up to the standard that I would have expected from other drones. Also, it is a shame that whilst you do have that 50 megapixel mode on stills, it's limited to JPEG only, and you need to drop it down to 4K if you want to get the JPEG and RAW option. Whilst that 50 megapixel image looks good, it does lack detail, and as I've already said, you should class it more of a high quality 12 megapixel more than a 50. I'm not saying the image quality is bad, it's just not, as I've said already, up to the standard of a 50 megapixel mirrorless camera. I know such a small sensor isn't going to be, but it does lack detail overall. My other big complaint with this drone, and really isn't specific to the drone itself, is its ability to handle wind. Whilst it's able to do that 15 meters a second, where I live, it's going to struggle, and a lot of the time down here it is very, very windy, and whilst you do have the ability to chuck it into that ludicrous mode with that priority on speed, I would be concerned where I live that I wouldn't get the drone back one day simply because of the weather I have where I live. If you're somewhere where wind isn't an issue, that won't be a problem for you, but it is something to take into account. As I've already mentioned, there are a few quirks on the remote. That device holder is an annoyance, as is the lack of ability to store the sticks, but there are some accessories out there available for that you can buy that help resolve those issues. Overall, I think Autel have done a very, very good job on this drone, and I would own one of these tomorrow if it wasn't for the fact of that 1080p 60 and its ability in wind. The Lite series might actually be the perfect model for me, and that is one I want to take a closer look at, because whilst this would almost do everything, I think the Lite might be a better fit for my personal use case. Finally, I just want to mention a little bit on price, because that is always inevitably going to be mentioned. This drone isn't the cheapest small drone on the market, but it is the most feature packed. And the reality is we are seeing prices of equipment rise across the globe, and you're going to be paying more to have the extra features like you get. I don't think it's particularly expensive. I just think it is more than many people would expect to pay for a sub 250 gram drone. But the reality is we are getting those technologies from those higher end models down to the smaller drones. And as a result of that, the price is going to creep up as well. In the end, I think if you're looking for the smallest possible drone with great image quality, it is well worth a look. It's not perfect, but it is going to tick a lot of boxes for a lot of people. That's it from me on this one. If you have found it interesting, please do consider hitting the subscribe button. I want to say a massive thank you to Dave at South Wales Drones for loaning me this. It's going to be heading back to him in the next couple of days. Please do check out a link to his website in the description if you're interested in getting one. He's not only a DJI dealer, but he's also an Autel dealer as well. He was the person that allowed me to make this completely independent review, and a massive thank you from me on that one, Dave. Finally, if you'd like to support the channel to allow us to keep making content like this, there are links to my Patreon as well as Buy Me a Coffee in the description, and it's only by you guys using them am I able to keep making content and hopefully continue to give you guys reviews like you've seen today. Anyway, that's it from me. Stay safe, and I will speak to you guys again soon.